Senate Bill 8, which is the Texas anti-abortion bill that bans abortion after 6 weeks. So people are justifiably outraged by this. We've seen a lot of responses, the kind of more mainstream liberal response, the socialist response. But I think people feel like this is the start of some extreme restrictions and a backslide for progress for people in America. So thank you so much for joining us, Jenny.
It's great to be here.
You are our go-to when we think about this issue because your books cover the gamut from all perspectives of reproductive rights, not just the fight for healthcare rights with abortion, but the fight for reproductive rights in general and the ways in which deprivation in other areas affect people's choices in terms of family planning or sexuality and sexual health. So thank you so much for coming. The first question that I'd like to start with is, can you go into what Senate Bill 8 is? How similar is that to other GOP strategies? And what does it mean for left electoralism?
Yeah, well, Senate Bill 8 is basically it's basically a standard 6-week abortion ban. Several states have passed these. They always get jammed up in the courts. But Texas came upon the ruse of making it illegal to get an abortion after 6 weeks, which is basically 85% of abortions are after 6 weeks because you mostly don't know that you're pregnant.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult
before that.
And sometimes the tests don't register. A pregnancy test may not even register the amount of hormone in the body that indicates that a pregnancy has happened at that time.
Yeah, so basically it's making abortion illegal. But Texas came upon this ruse of making it illegal, but then they are leaving the enforcement up to private citizens who can basically sue the hell out of anyone that they suspect of providing assistance to get an abortion that's after 6 weeks. So I don't think anyone thought this would hold up in court. It was just part of this strategy to have more pressure on the Supreme Court to weaken abortion rights. But then, surprise, surprise, the Supreme Court, with actually Chief Justice Roberts dissenting, actually allowed the law to go into effect. And now it's going to be debated in lower courts. But meanwhile, if you're in Texas and you need an abortion, it's going to be really difficult. So that's the situation right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are providers at clinics in neighboring states have said that they're already seeing what they call abortion refugees going to other states that have their own restrictions because this has been weakened across the United States and trying to get this care that they desperately need. Can you tell us about the sort of liberal strategy to protect abortion rights and how that may differ from how they've been won historically?
Well, the traditional liberal approach, to some degree, it's been a reliance on the courts to hold back the worst of this tide of restrictions that have been coming out of right-wing state legislatures. I think we could say that last week was the expiration date of that strategy. And then the other thing is that leaders of the nonprofits that dominate the movement, and you think of Planned Parenthood and NARAL, for example, they have tended to sort of go for a respectability politics, which is like emphasizing the worst cases, rape, when a pregnancy threatens your life or health. This is not why most people get abortions. They get them because they don't want to be pregnant and bear a child. So basically, it's not really appealing to the vast majority of people who need abortion rights. And it's interesting to look at the history. The strategy of the 1960s movement that won us the rights we have actually went in exactly the opposite direction. There were laws to help in extreme cases that had been considered like since the 40s, and they were going nowhere when the women's liberation movement came on the scene and basically demanded free abortion for anybody who wanted one without any restrictions at all. And what that meant was it really appealed to a lot of people who needed abortion rights and weren't going to be affected by the rape, incest, life of the mother type strategy. So So I think we need a strategy that unites everybody who's affected by the abortion law, not just a strategy of let's help a few individuals. Now, as things have gotten more dire, there have been some advances, and I think that a more bold approach is taking hold, and it's seen some results. New York, Illinois, California, several other blue states have basically gotten rid of their pre-Roe anti-abortion laws. So even if the Supreme Court gets rid of the Roe standard, they will still have abortion rights in those states. So I think that we are now seeing the end of one strategy and the beginning of another one, which is to be a lot more bold.
Yeah, and you talked about how the strategy was to actually broaden the tent and essentially say all manner of women get abortions. In fact, I think some studies show that a majority of married women, of those who get abortions, a majority of them already have children or are already married. It's not just some worst case scenario that we have to protect. It is a healthcare right. And I've seen a lot of response to this, to Senate Bill 8, to Senate Bill 8 that sort of frames things as a kind of deliberate attack on women, an anti-women move, forgetting the fact that we live in a country where no person is guaranteed healthcare of any kind. We live in a country, the same country that denies women abortions is the country that denies children insulin. It's the same country that forcibly sterilizes refugees. It's the same country that essentially, on both sides, uses medical care and resources as a lever for power. So I wanted to talk to you about the left position. You know, we often wage wars of rhetoric, but this is an issue, along with healthcare access in general, that requires solidarity. This is not just, some people have pointed out, men get women pregnant. Why aren't men part of this? Why aren't men being penalized? That's not the world that we want. We don't want a world in which we require men to get vasectomies and have them reversed if they want to have kids. We want a world where anyone who wants a vasectomy can get one and it's free. We want a world where anyone who wants an abortion can get one and it's free. And we're kind of siloing the conversation about abortion when we reduce it to an issue of the sentiment of those who are denied access, when in fact we live in a country where most people are denied access to healthcare. So I wanted to talk to you about the kind of way of reframing that issue for people, a way that we can say, as the fight changed, as you just said, that we actually are all subject to the same resource war, and we are all on the same side of it.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to understand about abortion rights is that it's not really about punishing women for having sex, which has been the theory since the 60s. It's really about the political economy of who has the kids, who is going to pay for that. And there's a general agreement across the establishment that the birth rate should go up. The birth rate right now in the US is the lowest it's ever been. My group became aware of this acutely in 2003 when we were trying to get the morning after pill, which is after sex contraception, over the counter. The Democrats did not want to make this available. President Obama said he didn't want his young daughters to access it. And all of a sudden, it seemed like contraceptives were under attack from every angle. But when we looked at the history, contraceptives and abortion have always been attacked at the same time. It's not about sympathy for embryos or anything. It's really about making sure that we do the unpaid work of bearing and raising the workforce. So when abortion and contraception were first made illegal nationally in 1873 with the Comstock Law, it was clearly because they were concerned that married women were evading the responsibilities of large families by getting abortions or using contraception. And really, I think there's been a distortion of feminist understanding of this, because after World War II, there was a baby boom, and suddenly for about 20 years, for the first time in history, there was a panic among the ruling class about overpopulation. And they were worried that might encourage communism, and all these hungry people would overthrow their governments. That ended. That whole panic ended in the early 70s, but not before the feminist movement managed to win legal abortion in the U.S. And we were able to leverage the fact that it was illegal behind that abortion had become legal behind the Iron Curtain, where there was supposedly no freedoms, right? Except that here we were arrested if we got abortions, and there you could go to a hospital to get them. So by the 1980s, the panic about high birth rates had turned into a panic about low birth rates. And this has been the theme for the establishment and their think tanks ever since. They are worried that without population growth, the economy will stagnate. They use Japan as an example, where the workforce and actually the total population is now decreasing because of a low birth rate. They worry that employers will have to pay the costs of retirees, basically, unless people are forced to have large families that will take care of them when they're old. Gosh, they even talk about how can we cut Social Security if people don't have larger families that we can then force them to depend on. But they all want to get the birth rate up, obviously, without employers having to pay for paid leave, without having to pay for childcare, without healthcare guarantees or decent wages. So they're trying to figure out how to do that. And this is where it's connected to everything else. Like, one solution has been immigration. Let's import workers, and as they, proudly say, raised on someone else's nickel. But even that's not enough to deal with the current lowest ever birth rates that we have seen in the United States, which are due to the abysmal lack of support for child rearing that we experience. I mean, we don't even have guaranteed health care when we want to give birth, never mind taking care of ourselves or our children afterwards. So we've seen, there is a split right now in the ruling class. I think we've seen some moves to make it easier to have kids, like, for example, the child allowance that's been put in for the pandemic, and we're going to have to struggle to make that permanent. But the main thing that we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years has been increasingly making it harder to get birth control and abortion. And then we have sex ed that doesn't tell you anything except, just say no. So that's the context we're operating here. Like the demand of capitalism for more births is really what is at the root of all of this. And so it's really an extension of the neoliberal project to push all of the costs of that back into the family and onto working class people.
Yeah, I think you cover that really extensively in Birth Strike, which is a great exploration into a broader type of reproductive rights. Because I think sometimes the conversation can get hyper-focused on abortion rights, and for good reason. It's exceptionally cruel the way that these things attack women, and they always go hand in hand, just like Reagan's big black buck kind of austerity children's story. We see this with abortion also, where people are caricatured to be the worst potential example of why certain restrictions or laws are necessary. I wanted to talk to you more about the way that the left can focus on and fight for reproductive rights in a broader sense. And you've alluded to that in a way, the child tax credit, having a living wage, having affordable housing, rights to healthcare. How do you think we can broaden that message and say, yes, we support everyone's right to healthcare access, that includes abortion. We similarly support the right to all people to have fertility services, resources, and a world in which they can feel comfortable making the choice to have kids.
Yeah, that's the claim of the early 90s reproductive justice movement led by Black women, to say, look, it's not enough to have the ability to not have kids. Reproductive justice also involves the ability to have kids in safe and healthy conditions. So I think there's really a natural alliance that could be made right now. There's a whole pile of things that working people need that are currently being held up by the Senate filibuster, right? At least that's what the Democrats have been telling us. You know, if it weren't for the filibuster, we would have $15 minimum wage. We'd have the PRO Act. We'd have which is the PRO Act would allow basically put some laws on the side of workers trying to organize a union, and now you know, voting rights laws which are being held up, which, you know, also are important for throughout the South. I'm from Florida. We desperately need voting rights laws so that we can actually have a little bit more democracy. And now abortion rights, right? So there's a bill in Congress which has been introduced, I think, since 2013, called the Women's Health Protection Act. And this bill would just stop states from restricting abortion before what they call viability, which is around 23 weeks. It's not everything we want, but basically what it would do is codify the Roe decision, which the Supreme Court seems ready to ignore. So, you know, Democrats could have presumably passed this any one of the many times they've been in majority for the last 48 years since the Roe decision. But I think now we really have a chance to demand it. This bill has 48 Democratic co-sponsors. So the two holdouts are Joe Manchin, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey. So, you know, even Kirsten Sinema is signed onto the bill. And then no Republicans have signed on, but Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski in Alaska nominally support abortion rights. They say they're pro-choice. So I think pushing Congress on that is a top priority, and we can unite with everybody else who is trying to get rid of the filibuster. And you know, I think some feminists have been squeamish about calling for an end to the filibuster, and you know, I've even heard people in my group say, well, but then when the Republicans get back in, they'll be able to pass anything. Well, there's nothing to stop the Republicans when they get back in from blowing up the filibuster. The way the Republican Party sounds right now, I'm sure that that's what they will do the first moment they get in. So, so you know, the Democrats really need to be pushed on this. And as viewers of this show know, the Democrats are not always doing what they say they're going to do. So obviously, it's up to us to make sure that we push that. And there are marches on the abortion question planned for every state on October 2nd, which is right before the Supreme Court goes back into session. If people are interested in that, they can go to womensmarch.com and sign up for that. And then, of course, as you said, we have to remember the right to have an abortion doesn't mean anything if you don't have the money to get one. So that's why we need the Medicare for All Act, which would cover all the reproductive options, including abortion and free birth control, which I think would really be a great selling point for a lot of young people. So, so that's how we can, I think that's a way that we can really unite and push forward a whole range of working class necessities that we need right now.
Yeah, we are all living under the umbrella of a power structure that will manipulate us by, you know, denying us access to resources. That includes healthcare, and abortion is the kind of most visible place in which that happens. But the fissures are becoming clearer and clearer and clearer, and I think the time to unite, just like you said, is right now. This is not going to go away. The GOP has been not only pushing how far they can go restricting abortion access, but really pushing how far they can go in implementing laws that are directly against the majority of their constituents' wishes. And that's the other side of the situation in Texas. You have this rollback of abortion rights at the same time as this attack on voting rights, which was just passed by the governor. And this is not what the majority of people want there. It's not what the majority of the people in the United States wants. And so we see the way that these issues illuminate the kind of misogynistic roots in the country, the ways in which we are, you know, being pushed towards the aims of capital, but they also show that our political apparatus is experimenting with ever more ways to do exactly what we don't want to happen. So where do you see our power in the short term on the left? You've talked about the protests that are happening. You've talked about some of the strategies to kind of create coalitions. What do you think are the next steps in the next few years with this issue?
Well, there are a couple of really interesting things going on with abortion right now. And one is that there's a move to free up the current red tape around the abortion pill, so medication abortion. And right now we're in an interesting situation because of the pandemic. So the Food and Drug Administration has basically said that they are not going to enforce the rules that they have right now around getting the abortion pill, which currently require that you get it in person from a practitioner, which and they are considering, I believe they're supposed to come back with a decision by November 1st. My experience with the FDA is that that could easily turn into like February 9th. But they're supposed to decide whether to make those rules permanent. And what that means is that in a lot of states, you can go online, talk to a provider by phone, and receive the pills in the mail the next day. For example, the website abortionondemand.org basically provides abortion pills for considerably less than a clinic abortion at $239. And then because that is, pill abortions being sold that way may undermine independent clinics, they are giving 60% of their profits to independent abortion clinics so that clinical abortions will continue to be available. There's also a clearinghouse called plancpills.org, which has current information on where, if you are not in a state where telemedicine for abortion is currently legal, you can still get abortion pills in the mail, primarily from this group. Women on Web started another section of it called Aid Access. They're trying to protect themselves legally from the long arm of the U.S. prosecutors. But anyway, they basically, you can consult with them and they will mail you the pills from overseas. So that possibility, I think, is opening up a lot of new questions around how we can organize for abortion rights. I mean, the main thing to remember is that the courts didn't give us abortion rights, right? We organized for them and we took them. And in fact, when the Supreme Court made the Roe decision, it was partly forced by the worry that some states would soon have no abortion laws at all because they'd be successfully challenged. And that's actually the current situation in Canada. The law was vacated and there was no law to replace it. So in the long term, what we want is no special laws against abortion or really concerning abortion. It's just another medical procedure. And that's the way the law should be treating it. So that's I think our long-term goal. Right now, the Women's Health Protection Act is the closest we can get to that, because it basically says to the states, you can't make these restrictive laws. So I think it's a good thing to unite around. And then it requires us to unite with all of the other parts of the movement, which are trying to get rid of the filibuster and really push forward a whole raft of legislation that could help working people in all these different ways that we've been talking about. Of course, that requires the Democrats to have a real fire lit under them, which is obviously what we're all trying to do at this moment.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.